Discipline hurts, doesn't it? Waking up when your body begs for sleep. Staying silent when anger wants control. Working while everyone else is distracted. Laughing, wasting time like life owes them another chance. People call it suffering, they call it pressure, but they never talk about the other pain, the pain of watching your dreams rot because you chose comfort every single day. Failure doesn't arrive screaming, it arrives quietly, in excuses, in delayed decisions, in the habits you repeat when nobody is watching. You think discipline is cruel, try living with regret. Try staring at the life you could have had, knowing you traded it for temporary comfort. The truth is simple, discipline charges you now, failure charges you forever. Pain has two faces. Most people only recognize the first one. The pain of discipline, the early mornings, the isolation, the repetition, the constant pressure of forcing yourself to keep going when your mind is begging you to stop. That pain feels sharp, immediate, heavy. It burns while it's happening, so people run from it. They escape into distractions, comfort, entertainment, excuses, anything that helps them avoid responsibility for one more day. But there's another kind of pain, a quieter one, a slower one, the pain of regret. And unlike discipline, regret doesn't scream at the beginning. It waits patiently, silently. It sits in the background while you waste your time convincing yourself you'll start tomorrow. It watches while you trade your future for temporary comfort. And by the time you finally feel it, it's already too late. Discipline hurts for a moment. Regret hurts for a lifetime. People complain about the pain of training, but they never talk about the pain of weakness. They complain about sacrifice, but never about the humiliation of being left behind. They complain about hard work, but stay silent about the emptiness that comes from doing nothing with their lives. Strange, isn't it? Human beings will do almost anything to avoid temporary discomfort, even if it guarantees permanent suffering later. A lazy mind always negotiates. Take a break. You deserve comfort. One more hour won't matter. That voice sounds harmless in the moment. Soft, friendly, but it's dangerous, because every small excuse slowly builds the future you claim you never wanted. Failure is rarely one giant decision. It's a collection of small betrayals against yourself, repeated every single day. The scary part, regret ages people before time does. You can see it in their eyes. People who gave up on themselves years ago still smile, still laugh, still pretend everything is fine. But deep inside, they know they abandoned their potential for comfort. They know fear controlled their decisions. They know they chose the easy path so many times that eventually they became weak enough to believe they were never capable in the first place. Discipline creates scars. Regret creates prisons. When you force yourself to stay focused while others are distracted, it hurts. When you stay committed while others quit, it hurts. When you keep improving while nobody notices, it hurts. But that pain has purpose. That pain transforms people. It sharpens the mind. It builds control. It teaches you how to survive pressure without collapsing. Regret does the opposite. Regret destroys people slowly. It turns confidence into self-hatred. It turns ambition into envy. That's why so many people secretly hate successful individuals. Not because success is offensive, but because success reminds them of the version of themselves they abandoned. Every disciplined person becomes proof that excuses were never the real problem. And society has mastered the art of making weakness look normal. They'll laugh at the disciplined person for being too serious, while secretly admiring the results they could never achieve themselves. They mock routines, sacrifice, structure, because watching someone control their life reminds them they can't even control their own impulses. Most people want glory without discomfort, power without sacrifice, respect without consistency, but life doesn't work that way. Everything valuable demands pain as an entrance fee. The difference is simple. Discipline asks for your pain upfront. Regret waits until the end to collect everything. Comfort is seductive. That's why it destroys so many people without resistance. It doesn't attack you violently. It whispers. It tells you to relax a little longer, to delay the work, to stay where things feel safe. And the dangerous part is that comfort never looks like destruction in the beginning. It looks harmless, peaceful, deserved. That's how people slowly lose their potential without even noticing it happening. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to ruin their future. It happens quietly through habits, through excuses repeated so many times they start sounding like truth. I'll start tomorrow. I'm too tired. I need motivation first. Day after day, those small lies become chains. Invisible chains, the kind people carry for years while convincing themselves they're still free. Comfort makes people weak in ways they can't immediately see. A comfortable mind stops fighting, it stops growing, it stops tolerating pressure. The moment life becomes difficult, that person collapses because they trained themselves to escape discomfort instead of confronting it. And life always tests people eventually, always. The problem is that comfort rewards you instantly, while destroying you slowly. Discipline punishes you instantly, while building you slowly. Human beings are addicted to immediate pleasure, so most choose the path that feels good now without realizing they're sacrificing everything later. That's why potential dies in ordinary routines, endless scrolling, endless talking, endless waiting. People waste years distracting themselves from the very work that could transform their lives. Then, one day, reality arrives without mercy. Someone younger surpasses them. Someone hungrier replaces them. Someone more disciplined builds the life they kept fantasizing about. And suddenly they feel anger, jealousy, bitterness, not because life was unfair, but because deep down they know comfort stole the years they can never recover. Comfort convinces people they have unlimited time. That's the illusion. It makes tomorrow feel guaranteed. So they delay action, delay growth, delay change, but time doesn't care about intentions. Life keeps moving while comfortable people stay trapped in the same cycle, repeating the same excuses until they become permanent identities. You can always recognize someone consumed by comfort. They avoid challenges. They fear criticism. They quit when pressure appears. Their confidence disappears the second life stops being easy. Because comfort never builds strength, it builds dependency. Dependency on easy moods, easy situations, easy outcomes. The moment difficulty enters the room, their entire identity begins to shake. The terrifying part is that comfort can look successful from the outside. Smiles, entertainment, temporary happiness. But inside, there's emptiness, because people know when they are wasting their potential. They feel it late at night, when distractions fade and silence exposes the truth. That feeling, that quiet disappointment in yourself, it eats people alive over time. Most people aren't exhausted from hard work. They're exhausted from avoiding the work they know they should be doing. There's a difference. Avoidance creates guilt. Guilt creates anxiety. Anxiety creates paralysis. And then comfort becomes the escape from the very suffering it created in the first place. A perfect prison. Society encourages this weakness now. Comfort is marketed everywhere. Easy entertainment, easy validation, easy dopamine. People are trained to consume instead of create, to react instead of think, to escape instead of confront themselves. And the longer someone lives this way, the harder it becomes to recognize their own wasted potential. Potential is fragile. Ignore it long enough and it disappears, not because you lack talent, but because you lack the courage to stay uncomfortable long enough to become dangerous. Comfort never destroys people immediately. That would make it easy to recognize. It destroys them slowly, softly, politely, until one day they look in the mirror and realize they became average while pretending they were just taking it easy. Failure never enters your life like a monster crashing through the door. If it did, people would fight it immediately. No, failure is smarter than that. It arrives quietly, disguised as harmless excuses, small delays, tiny compromises that seem insignificant in the moment. That's why most people don't even realize they're building failure while it's happening. People imagine failure as one catastrophic event. Losing everything overnight, public humiliation, a dramatic collapse. But real failure is much more subtle. It begins the first time you betray your own standards and convince yourself it doesn't matter. One missed opportunity, one broken promise to yourself, one moment where comfort wins over responsibility, small things, tiny cracks. But cracks spread. Excuses are dangerous because they sound reasonable. I'm tired. I'll do it later. I'm not ready yet. Those words feel innocent when you say them once. But repeated daily, they become the foundation of an entire life built on avoidance. A weak mind always searches for explanations instead of solutions. And the more excuses someone creates, the more they slowly train themselves to accept mediocrity as normal. That's the terrifying part about failure. It becomes a habit before it becomes a result. Nobody notices when discipline disappears little by little. Nobody notices when ambition starts shrinking. It happens slowly. People stop pushing themselves, stop taking risks, stop demanding more from their lives. Then eventually they stop believing they're capable of greatness at all. Not because they lacked talent, but because excuses slowly murdered their confidence. Excuses feel safe because they protect the ego. If you blame time, luck, stress, or circumstances, then you never have to confront the painful truth that your choices created your reality. That's why so many people cling to excuses like survival tools. Admitting responsibility is painful. It forces you to realize how much control you actually had the entire time. Weak habits are born from tiny decisions repeated without thought. Sleeping instead of working, complaining instead of adapting, watching others succeed while doing nothing to improve yourself. Every repeated action becomes part of your identity. People think identity creates habits, but habits create identity first. A person who constantly avoids discomfort eventually becomes someone incapable of handling pressure. And pressure reveals everything. The person full of excuses collapses the moment life becomes difficult because excuses never build strength. They build dependency, dependency on ideal moods, ideal timing, ideal conditions. But life doesn't wait for perfect conditions. Life rewards those who act despite discomfort, despite fear, despite uncertainty. The saddest thing about excuses is that they often come from intelligent people. People who know exactly what they should be doing. They can explain success perfectly. They can give advice to everyone else. But knowledge without action becomes torture, because deep inside, they know they're lying to themselves every single day. Failure grows strongest in silence. In private moments nobody sees. That's where futures are destroyed. Not publicly, quietly, a distracted hour here, a wasted day there. People think small actions don't matter because results aren't immediate. But repeated long enough, small decisions become destiny. A man doesn't become weak overnight. He becomes weak through tolerated weakness, through repeated surrender to comfort, through years of choosing what feels easy instead of what builds strength. Then eventually he looks at successful people and calls them lucky because accepting the truth would destroy him. The truth that discipline was available to him too, but excuses felt safer. Excuses are addictive because they remove guilt temporarily. They help people sleep at night while their potential slowly dies underneath them, but reality always collects the debt eventually. Time exposes everyone. The disciplined person gains confidence, control, respect. The excuse-driven person gains regret, resentment, and endless frustration. Failure doesn't begin with losing. It begins the moment you start making peace with your own excuses. Self-control is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't seek attention or validation. It works in silence, in moments nobody notices, in decisions that look small but decide everything. That's the real difference between someone who controls their life and someone who is controlled by it. Most people think power is about force, but real power is restraint, the ability to pause when emotions are rising, to stay still when impulses are screaming, to continue when everything inside you wants to quit. That is where control begins, not in action, but in resistance. Every person is constantly being pulled in two directions. One side pulls toward comfort, distraction, escape. The other pulls toward responsibility, discipline, growth. And the direction you follow repeatedly becomes your identity. There is no neutral ground. Every small choice is training your mind either to obey impulses or to command them. Without self-control, a person becomes a passenger in their own life. They react instead of decide. They feel instead of think. They follow moods instead of principles. One moment they're motivated, the next moment they're lost. That instability is not personality, it's lack of control disguised as emotion. Self-control is built in the smallest moments. When you say no to what feels easy, when you complete what you promised even when motivation disappears, when you ignore distractions that offer instant pleasure but long-term emptiness, these moments look insignificant, but they are where strength is forged. People underestimate how much their impulses rule them. The urge to check the phone, the urge to delay work, the urge to escape discomfort. Each impulse, when obeyed, weakens the mind a little more, not dramatically, not instantly, but gradually, like erosion. Over time, the mind becomes trained to obey instead of command. A controlled person feels the same urges as everyone else. The difference is not absence of desire, but mastery over it. They feel the urge and still choose discipline. That is why they grow stronger, while others remain stuck in cycles of temporary satisfaction. The world rewards control in ways people don't immediately see. Focus creates skill, consistency creates progress, Discipline creates reliability, and reliability creates opportunity. No system, no opportunity, no success survives chaos. Only control builds stability strong enough to sustain growth. But self-control demands sacrifice. It demands the rejection of instant gratification, and that rejection feels painful at first. The mind resists it because it is addicted to reward without effort. That's why discipline feels like suffering in the beginning, because you are breaking addiction, not just building habit. Most people never reach control because they quit during discomfort. They mistake resistance for failure. But resistance is not a sign to stop. It is a sign that change is happening. Every moment of struggle is evidence that your old self is losing power. Without self-control, emotions decide everything. Anger decides reactions. Laziness decides actions. Fear decides choices, and a life led by emotions becomes unpredictable, unstable, and fragile. But a life led by control becomes deliberate. Structured, strong, self-control is not about being emotionless. It is about not being enslaved by emotion. You still feel everything: anger, fear, desire, doubt. But none of it gets final authority. That authority belongs to discipline. The strongest people are not those who never fall into temptation, but those who refuse to stay in it. They fall, recognize it, and return to control faster than others. That recovery speed is what defines strength. Over time, control changes identity. The person who once struggled to resist becomes someone who naturally chooses discipline. The struggle becomes quieter, the resistance weaker, until control no longer feels like effort, but nature. And in that state, life stops being random reactions and becomes intentional direction, shaped not by impulse, but by command of the mind itself. Motivation is loud at the beginning. It feels powerful, almost unstoppable. It shows up like a storm, filling your mind with energy, ideas, and promises of change. But storms don't last, and when motivation fades, most people fade with it. That's where the real difference begins, not in how excited you feel, but in what you continue doing when excitement disappears. Consistency is silent. It doesn't depend on mood. It doesn't wait for inspiration. It doesn't ask for permission from feelings. It simply continues day after day, even when everything inside you says stop. That is why consistency creates results, while motivation only creates intention. People overestimate what they can do in a single moment of inspiration and underestimate what they can build through repetition. They think transformation happens through bursts of energy, but real transformation is slow, almost invisible in the beginning. It is built in the hours nobody sees, in the effort nobody praises, in the routine that feels ordinary until it becomes unstoppable. The mind loves motivation because it feels easy. It gives emotional reward without demanding discipline. But motivation is unstable. It changes with sleep, stress, environment, and emotion. One bad day can destroy it completely. That's why relying on motivation is like relying on weather, unpredictable and unreliable. Consistency, on the other hand, doesn't care about conditions. It survives bad days, it survives boredom, it survives doubt. Even when progress feels invisible, consistency continues anyway. That is its strength. It builds momentum without needing validation. Most people quit right before results appear because they expect immediate reward. They assume effort should produce visible change quickly, but growth doesn't announce itself. It accumulates silently. And because the mind cannot always see progress, it convinces the person to stop. That's where consistency separates those who succeed from those who remain stuck. Every skill, every achievement, every transformation follows the same pattern: repetition over time. Not intensity, not emotion, repetition. The people who master this understand something others don't. Showing up matters more than feeling ready. There is a strange truth about discipline. The first few days feel the hardest, then it becomes slightly easier. Not because the task changed, but because resistance weakens when faced repeatedly. The mind adapts. What once felt heavy starts to feel normal, and what feels normal eventually becomes identity. Consistency also removes dependence on motivation. When something becomes routine, you no longer need emotional fuel to start. You simply do it because it is part of who you are. That shift is powerful. It turns effort into structure and structure into progress. People often admire sudden success, but they ignore the invisible consistency behind it. Years of repetition, years of doing the same thing when no one was watching, years of choosing discipline over distraction. That is the cost most people are not willing to pay because it doesn't feel exciting in the moment. The truth is, consistency is not impressive at first. It looks ordinary, repetitive, even boring, but boredom is where growth hides. Because anything meaningful requires patience through phases where nothing seems to change. Most people fail not because they lack ability, but because they cannot tolerate repetition without emotional reward. They want progress to feel exciting every day, but real growth is often quiet and unglamorous. Consistency also builds trust with yourself. Every time you follow through, you strengthen self-belief. Every time you break your own promise, you weaken it. Over time, this determines whether you see yourself as reliable or inconsistent. The gap between those who achieve and those who don't is not talent. It is repetition. One continues when it becomes boring. The other stops when excitement disappears. And slowly, consistency turns invisible effort into visible change that once looked impossible from the start. Everything meaningful in life demands a trade. Nothing comes free. People like to believe otherwise, but that belief is exactly what keeps them stuck. They want strength without struggle, success without discomfort, results without cost, but life doesn't operate on comfort rules. It operates on exchange. You give something now to gain something later, or you keep everything now and lose more than you realize later. Temporary sacrifice is the part most people fear because it feels like loss in moment. Sleep sacrificed for discipline, comfort sacrificed for growth, time sacrificed for focus, entertainment sacrificed for building something real. In the moment, it feels like you are losing pieces of your life. That's the illusion, because what you are actually losing is weakness the mind doesn't understand long-term rewards easily. It reacts to immediate discomfort. When you wake up early, it complains. When you skip distractions, it resists. When you push through fatigue, it panics. It tries to convince you that sacrifice is dangerous, that comfort is necessary, that ease is survival. But it never tells you the truth that comfort without sacrifice slowly turns into limitation. Every strong person carries invisible sacrifices that shaped them. Hours no one saw, opportunities they rejected, comforts they refused. While others were chasing temporary pleasure, they were quietly paying the price for something permanent. That is where strength is built, not in moments of ease, but in moments where you choose discipline over escape again and again. Temporary sacrifice feels like loss because you are paying before you see results. That delay is where most people quit. They expect immediate reward for effort, and when life doesn't respond quickly, they assume nothing is happening. But development doesn't announce itself in real time. It accumulates silently, like pressure forming beneath the surface. Invisible until it becomes undeniable, the uncomfortable truth is that everything weak in your life today is connected to a moment where sacrifice was avoided, a skipped workout, a delayed decision, an ignored responsibility, not because one moment destroys everything, but because repeated avoidance becomes identity. And identity is what shapes outcomes far more than intention. People underestimate how small sacrifices compound. 1 hour less of distraction becomes clarity over time. One repeated decision to stay focused becomes skill. One habit of choosing effort over ease becomes resilience. None of it feels powerful in isolation, but together it creates a foundation that cannot be easily broken. There is a strange pattern in human behavior. People will accept permanent discomfort just to avoid temporary pain. They will stay weak for years just to avoid a few months of discipline. They will tolerate regret far longer than they would tolerate effort. That imbalance is what keeps most lives unchanged. Temporary sacrifice is not about punishment. It is about exchange. You give up something lower to gain something higher. You trade impulse for control. You trade distraction for direction. You trade comfort for capability. But in the moment of sacrifice, the brain only sees what is being removed, not what is being built. This is why discipline feels heavy at the beginning. Not because it is harmful, but because it is unfamiliar. The mind resists unfamiliar patterns even when they lead to improvement. It prefers known weakness over unknown strength. That resistance is the price of transformation itself over time. Something shifts quietly. What once felt like sacrifice begins to feel like structure. What once felt painful begins to feel necessary. What once required force begins to happen naturally. The mind adapts, reshapes, rebuilds itself around repetition, and while this internal shift happens, external life slowly changes shape as well. Opportunities appear differently, confidence becomes steadier, decisions become sharper. Not because circumstances changed first, but because the internal cost of discipline has already been paid in advance through repeated sacrifice that others avoided because it looked too heavy in the beginning.